World War III. With each passing year, the spectre of a global clash between powers with the potential to destroy everything looms larger. The conflict in Ukraine could easily spiral into a pan-European war, drawing in China, the US, and others on both sides. A Chinese move on Taiwan or a North Korean move on South Korea might have the same effect. And then there's the Middle East, where Israel seems determined to draw the US into war with Iran, which would in all likelihood upend the global oil trade and with it the global economy, with war breaking out all over, the probable consequence. But wherever it ignites, World War III won't just involve armies. Billions of ordinary people in every corner of the globe will be affected, probably in life-changing ways. And yet the vast majority of people are completely unprepared, potentially putting themselves and their families at great risk as a result. Preparing for World War III isn't necessarily what you think, but it could mean the difference between surviving intact and being a casualty statistic. Let's take a closer look at what you need to do. Of course, your experience of the war is likely to be very different depending on where you are. Being caught in the middle of a war zone is going to be significantly more challenging than being on a remote island thousands of miles from the nearest battlefield. However, even if the nation you're in is not directly involved in the fighting and is, in fact, located far from it, it's inevitable that you'll still be affected. There are basically 5 primary threat types that you'll have to prepare for. The first is the threat of a nuclear attack, whether that's a limited attack or a full-scale nuclear war. This is the most unlikely of the 5 threats, but also the most severe if you're exposed to a nuclear explosion. If you're within the blast radius, you'll have almost unimaginable explosive power and heat to contend with, and the initial detonation unleashes a fireball that incinerates everything for miles around. Then after the blast comes the fallout radiation. Depending on the size of the blast and wind dispersion of the radiation, you could be severely affected up to 100 miles away, and for decades. So how do you prepare for these threats and mitigate against them? The first thing you can do is to be aware of your proximity to likely targets. If you live within a few city blocks of a major military installation, critical government buildings, power station, or other key infrastructure, you're at risk. If war breaks out with the belligerent nuclear power, especially if they're being defeated, it's definitely worth having a plan in place to relocate somewhere much safer at short notice, an action also known as bugging out, but more on that later. If bugging out is not feasible, identify a safe room such as a basement or the innermost room of your house, and prepare it to protect and sustain you and your family from a nuclear attack. Or at least make sure you have the materials at hand to prepare such a room in a hurry if need be. If you don't mind the weird looks you'll get from neighbors, consider building a standalone fallout shelter, perhaps dug into your own backyard. You'll want to reinforce the walls with materials such as wood, concrete, bricks, or sand to thicken barriers and minimize exposure to radiation creeping in. Similarly, when you first move into your safe room, seal all doors, windows, and vents with duct tape and plastic sheeting. Ensure you have heavy curtains to protect against flying glass and other debris, and consider cutting down any trees that could be blown out of the ground and fly into your house during a blast. Make sure you have enough supplies to comfortably stay inside for at least 24 hours, although you may have to shelter in place for up to a month or more, depending on your location and the severity of the radiation. Finally, keep up to a month's supply of potassium iodide or Ki tablets on hand. They'll protect your thyroid from radioactive iodine poisoning. Besides possibly stocking up on high-end hazmat suits, there's not much else that the average Joe can do in the event of a nuclear attack. But even if World War III doesn't go nuclear, if you're located in one of the warring countries, the spillover of conventional war is bound to affect you. This is the second category of threat that you'll need to prepare against. If you're in the US or a relatively remote, well-defended island like Australia or New Zealand, you're unlikely to face the risk of invasion. There is a small risk that Russia may try to attack the US via Alaska. Just 2.4 miles separate Big Diomede Island in Russia and Little Diomede Island in the United States, after all. However, the Russians would then somehow have to advance close to 1,900 miles through Alaska and western Canada just to reach the US border. That's highly unlikely. If you're in Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, but also in the West, your risk of invasion is much greater. You may have to face fighting in your city or even in your neighborhood. If you live in a smaller town or rural area, you'll likely face the prospect of forced evacuation by your government. If you have the means, you'll also very likely be considering a voluntary evacuation in the opposite direction to the approaching front lines. Depending on how close you are to the front lines, you'll also face the prospect of missile and drone bombardments. That risk will only increase the closer you are to military facilities, government buildings, and critical infrastructure. Your risk also increases if you're near air defense systems, as evidenced in Russia, Ukraine, and Israel in recent times. Much of the damage to civilian buildings in modern warfare is caused by falling debris from drones and missiles shot down by these systems. But even if you're thousands of miles away from a ground war, for example, if war is raging in Europe or East Asia and you're somewhere in the central US, you're still likely at risk from enemy acts of sabotage and terrorism. This third category of threats, of course, includes suicide bombers blowing themselves up at the mall, car and truck bombs, fanatics opening fire at crowds with semi-automatic rifles and the like. There are steps you can take to mitigate these dangers, as we'll discuss shortly. However, potentially much more dangerous is the threat of cyber and infrastructure attacks. Arguably as devastating as a nuclear attack in terms of its overall impact would be a nationwide EMP, or electromagnetic pulse attack, that would incapacitate all electronic devices nationwide. All electronic equipment from your microwave and laptop to all the delicate equipment at hospitals and airports would instantly become useless thanks to the destruction of the power grid. Thus, much of modern life, because it's tied to electronic connectivity, would come to a standstill just like that. But even traditional cyber and infrastructure attacks have the ability to completely upend your life, putting you and your family at great risk. It's not hard to imagine hackers or saboteurs taking out power grids, plunging cities or even entire regions into darkness indefinitely. Similarly, water and communications infrastructure would likely be targets, along with key transport hubs like airports, ports, and rail networks. But perhaps the most disruptive of all will be cyber attacks on the financial system, particularly the banking sector. Imagine suddenly not being able to use the debit and credit cards, banking apps, or online banking sites, and the chaos that would ensue. But even without sabotage of the banking system itself, World War III will almost certainly mean a significant level of economic upheaval worldwide, driven to a large extent by disruptions to global supply chains. This is the fourth category of threats resulting from World War III breaking out. We live in a deeply connected, globalized world, where a great many goods on the shelves or the components that make them originate in many different parts of the world. Western economies have been geared over decades to run in just-in-time supply chains. While efficient and profitable, they're also very vulnerable to shocks. So wherever you are, the combination of trade wars, attacks on logistics, closure of shipping routes, and financial disruptions are bound to leave the shelves empty of any number of products, including essentials like food, fuel, and medicine. As witnessed during the enforced lockdowns of the COVID era, supply chain disruptions can lead to economic turmoil, businesses can close down, unemployment can increase, and pressure is put on welfare services. In peacetime, government and central banks have some leeway to increase spending by increasing debt to cushion the population from these negative financial effects. But in wartime, with defense spending inevitably already through the roof, too much spending will increase inflation and may result in bank failures and even the complete devaluation of the currency, i.e. hyperinflation. And that leads to the fifth category of, and arguably the most immediate threat that World War III will pose in places like the US and Australia, which are less likely to be directly impacted by the military aspects of the war: societal breakdown. The risks here are twofold: civil unrest and government overreach. As we saw during COVID, even the most liberal of Western democracies will gleefully lock down its population and behave like tyrannical autocracies if panicked enough. It's highly likely that, in general, during wartime, you can expect stringent clampdowns on freedom of speech and movement, increased surveillance, and possibly conscription and martial law. If the economic situation deteriorates, expect violent protests, looting, a breakdown of civil order, and exploding crime rates. Depending on where you are, this may be exacerbated by an influx of refugees fleeing war-torn areas. As supply chain disruptions bite, emergency services may start to break down, and as civil disorder spreads, law enforcement may either break down, become increasingly brutal, or both. So the risks of a world at war are far more pervasive than just the threat of being blown up or shot by enemy forces. And if you're not prepared, the second-order effects, the social and economic upheaval, might end up being even more dangerous. Fortunately, there is plenty you can do to make sure you survive and possibly even thrive through World War III. So how do you prepare? Experts recommend breaking it down into three basic categories: EDC, or everyday carry, mobility, and homestead. The idea is to be prepared on three critical levels: having crucial items on your person, making sure you can move safely, securely, and with everything you'll need for your journey, and making your home environment as safe and resilient as possible. Starting with EDC, the first consideration is security and self-defense. If you're in a country like the US where ownership of firearms is permitted, perhaps consider a licensed pistol and concealed carry it whenever you leave home. Make sure you're proficient at shooting it and carry a spare magazine with you. If you're not legally allowed to carry firearms in your country, you could carry the next most lethal legal weapon that you are permitted to carry, for example, pepper spray or a tactical pen. It's also recommended to carry a high-quality knife that can be used in a fight or for hunting. Additionally, it's well worth keeping an all-purpose tool like a Leatherman or Swiss Army knife in your back or chest pack, along with a personal alarm such as a loud whistle or electronic screamer. Other essential survival items you should have in your EDC bag are a good, resilient flashlight like a high-lumen LED, a lighter or waterproof matches, a paracord bracelet for emergency rope usage, important documents like passports and cash, preferably in small bits and coins. Absolutely essential for your EDC bag is an individual first aid kit or IFAK. In it, keep bandages, sterile gauze pads, antiseptic wipes or solution, antibiotic ointment, painkillers, a thermometer, scissors, tweezers, disposable gloves, and at least a week's supply of any prescription medications. As we'll see, you can and should keep more comprehensive medical supplies in your vehicle and home, but those are the essentials to keep on your person. Assuming there's no EMP, the other absolutely essential category of items for your EDC bag is the means of communication. Make sure you have maps and emergency numbers stored offline on your smartphone in case the internet goes down. Keep a power bank for charging your devices, preferably solar-powered. In case communication systems go down, it's also worth keeping a handheld radio, something like a Baofeng UV5R if you're ham licensed, otherwise an FRS GMRS device. In terms of mobility, the main thing to ensure is that your vehicle is in excellent condition and ready to drive like the wind if and when required. Keep a tire repair kit and a portable air compressor on hand, along with jumper cables and a portable battery booster, spare fuel, duct tape, zip ties for improvised fixes, and a folding shovel. But your vehicle can also act as a kind of extended EDC. For self-defense, you could keep a second firearm, possibly a rifle, in a secure lockbox, if, of course, you're in a country where it's legal to do so. But you can also fashion improvised weapons like an expandable baton or tire iron. For emergencies, it's also worth investing in a window breaker and/or seatbelt cutter. You should also keep a much more comprehensive medical kit in your vehicle, including a full trauma kit containing chest seals, more bandages, shears, burn gel, splints, and an expanded set of medications such as antidiarrheal medication and insect repellents. Finally, make sure you have everything you'll need on hand if you need to leave in a serious hurry. That should definitely include warm clothing such as jackets, gloves, warm socks, and blankets. Water is essential, so keep at least a gallon in the vehicle along with a good quality water filter. While you're at it, stash nutritious non-perishable foods like energy bars and dried fruit. If you do have to leave in a hurry or bug out, it's highly advantageous to have a destination or several in mind. That could be anywhere from relatives in a different city to designated safe zones or refugee encampments. Make sure you know several different routes and keep an old-school map book, as well as downloaded routes onto your smartphone for offline use. Those measures should enable you to deal with most of what wartime might throw at you while you're on the move. But what about prepping your homestead? There's plenty you can do to make sure your home is your castle in a very real, defendable sense. If you're in the US or other countries where firearms are legal, make yourself as resilient as possible by keeping a rifle or two, like an AR-15 or bolt-action shotgun on hand. And make sure you can shoot them expertly. If firearms are illegal in your country, keep and learn to use a crossbow, air rifle, or black powder firearm instead. Beef up your home's security by reinforcing doors and windows with deadbolts or security film, and if feasible, install electrified perimeter fencing, install motion-activated cameras and motion sensors for situational awareness and as a deterrent to would-be intruders. In that regard, a ferocious guard dog or two can also come in handy. The basic idea here is layered security, enhanced situational awareness via perimeter surveillance and alarms, backed by reinforced doors and windows, a highly secure safe room, and finally defensive weapons. The second area where you need to be super prepared is ensuring you have power. Here it's well worth investing in a solar generator and solar panels, along with a robust battery bank. One of the few things you can do to protect against an EMP attack is to construct a Faraday cage and keep the battery bank and other critical equipment, like an emergency laptop and smartphone for example, inside it at all times. But it's also worth keeping torches and headlamps, especially in your safe room or shelter, along with candles and/or paraffin lamps. Other essential tools to keep on hand are a fire extinguisher, a gas shut-off tool in case of leaks, a hand-crank radio for NOAA weather alerts, and an axe or hatchet, both for firewood and self-defense. You should also keep a fully stocked home medical station, capable of handling an extended stay. In addition to extra supplies of all the items in your EFAK and vehicle first aid kit, this should include a full trauma kit, including multiple tourniquets, chest seals and splints, a suture kit, and a dental emergency kit. Make sure you have at least 30 days' supply of any prescription meds and have stockpiles of painkillers, antibiotics, and other essential medications. Lastly, you need to make sure you have enough food and liquid for a potentially extended period. Keep 3 to 6 months' worth of dry and non-perishable foods stashed, particularly calorie-dense foods that you like to eat. This should include staples like rice and beans, but also canned and freeze-dried foods. If you have the space in your yard, start growing your own food, especially robust vegetables like potatoes and cabbage. You can grow highly nutritious numerous microgreens and sprouts on your windowsill. And if you can handle them, keep chickens for eggs and meat. It's also well worth learning how to jar and/or can things yourself, not just to sustain yourself, but also to create barterable goods. Water is, needless to say, another crucial item. If you live in a high rainfall area, install rainwater collectors and store the collected water in tanks. Otherwise, invest in tanks and fill them up manually. Try to ensure enough water for a 2-week stay, roughly 1 gallon per person per day. Preferably keep a good quality water filter and bleach for purification. Of course, all of these items are useless if you don't know how to use them. A gun is useless if you can't fire it. A first aid kit is useless if you don't know how to use it. It's essential that at least one member of your household is trained and proficient at each of the crucial technologies that you'll need: applying first aid, firing weapons, growing food and cooking, etc. The more basic survival skills you have, the more resilient you will be, period. And the longer the war goes on, the more valuable skills like sewing, hunting, plumbing, mechanics, and repairs will become. Of course, no man is an island, as the old saying goes, and you're not going to be alone facing the war and its impacts. However self-sufficient you are, you're still going to need certain items from the outside and to coexist with others in your neighborhood and community. That's why another essential aspect of preparing for war is having the means to secure the items and cooperative coexistence that you'll need to survive. If you're lucky, you'll find yourself in a community that chooses to stand together against criminals and/or invaders, but even then, the more you have to offer, the easier it is to secure yourself. To this end, keep as much physical cash on hand as you can afford, along with some gold and silver coins in case cash becomes worthless. If the monetary system collapses, you'll probably need goods to barter for the things you need. Alcohol, tobacco, ammunition, medicine, batteries, tools, and food are all tried and tested stalwarts when it comes to bartering and are well worth keeping on hand. Finally, an often overlooked but critical aspect of preparing for war is mitigating the psychological and emotional effects. Panic, trauma, and fear can derail even the best-laid preparations. In the early stages of a war, many civilians suffer from acute stress disorder, or ASD, which manifests as panic, hypervigilance, insomnia, or emotional numbness. Many suffer from survivor's guilt when others have been hurt or killed while they survived unscathed. If left unchecked, this can lead to PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and other ills. These effects can disrupt communities, fostering paranoia about neighbors or authorities, apathy, and tribalism. However, there are steps you can take to prepare yourself psychologically and to deal with these stresses as they happen. If war clouds loom, practice blackouts, rationing, or no internet days with your family to adapt to discomfort. One or more members of your family can undergo psychological first aid training, for example via a Red Cross course. It's also been established that routine increases stability, so try to keep meal and sleep schedules consistent. Collective tasks such as gardening or patrolling together also help reduce feelings of apathy and helplessness. Conversely, role assignment can also provide a sense of purpose. For example, one person keeps watch while another guards the supplies. Emergency comfort items like favorite images, music, or religious texts in your safe room can also play a big role in keeping things calm and under control. And in war or at any other time, physical exercise is one of the best ways to relieve stress, since it reduces cortisol, the stress hormone in the body. So there you have it. Now you know how to prepare for World War III. But what do you think? Is this all tinfoil hat conspiracy doom porn paranoia, or is it stupid not to at least take some steps to protect yourself in case things go sideways unexpectedly? How likely is it that World War III will break out anyway? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and thank you, as always, for watching.